this episode of the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing preparation, and in particular, how to prepare for a match or a tournament that's upcoming. Perhaps you have a tournament or a big match this upcoming weekend or in a few weeks, and you want to think about how can you put yourself in the best possible position to be ready, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and what that might look like in terms of preparing in the best possible way. In the past, we've had a discussion with Dr. Stephen Walker where we talked a lot about preparation. And we broke down some of the different mental tools that you could utilize, things like visualization, things like meditation and mindfulness, things like having routines that you utilize maybe the night before or right before a match, that you can utilize. But in this episode, yeah, we'll talk about sort of the type of situation where, okay, you have something coming up. Let's start now and let's think about how we want to prepare for this upcoming match. So Brian, if you, as we get this conversation started, if you were working with an athlete and, it's a few days to go before the tournament, let's say 3 or 4 days, where do you generally begin in terms of helping that athlete to get prepared in all these different facets?
Well, I'm glad you started with, say, the chronological approach to this. I think that's probably the best way. I think when we did talk to Dr. Stephen Walker, we were kind of like a little bit all over the place in terms of that. I don't know that we actually really help people structure a preparation routine, and I think that's something that we can do today. And so I think the few days ahead or the week ahead, really the main focus for me with players is concentrating on some of the fundamentals, meaning first of all, paying attention to things like your sleep, your nutrition, your hydration, right? So sleep, making sure we're getting 8 to 10 hours. One of the things that I see with a lot of players is that when they don't get enough sleep, they struggle with their focus, they struggle with their ability to manage their emotions in competition. And so sleep it's such a great cure for a lot of those things that we want to be paying attention to that throughout the week. We want to be really professional with that aspect of things. I think the same goes for what we're eating and what we're drinking. We want to make sure, if it's an important event, we want to have some clean living around that and making sure we're paying attention to what we're eating, regardless of what one's diet is. If we can be, managing portions, managing a lot amount of sugar, different types of drinks or whatever, making sure we're doing all the right things there. And then practices. So the practices throughout that week don't necessarily need to be hard, but you want to make sure you have good practices with specific goals. So there might be during the week different themes that you're bringing to the court each day. So, one day it might be about your ground strokes, or a particular ground stroke, or there might be something about, with your match play, because I do think you should get some matches in, if possible, during the week, or at least one practice match over the course of the week. So we're getting a little bit of pressure training in there, and we feel like we're ready to actually compete. So I think those are like the foundational skills we want to make sure that we're good at, right? So the sleep, the nutrition, the hydration, and then of course the recovery, right? So after we're practicing, let's make sure we're doing the stretching, the foam rolling. If massage is at all an option for a player, I think that's a great idea. Just to make sure, from a physical energy perspective, that we're going into that match with as much physical energy as possible. One of the books that I found that really helped my perspective on this was Jim Lair's The Power of Full Engagement, in which he talks about how life is, we're really alternating between expending energy and recovering energy. And very much as athletes, or even as people who may have jobs, we focus a lot on the expending energy piece and not as much on the recovering. And the idea here is that throughout this week, we want to make sure that we're not just expending, without recovery. And recovery can be, nutrition and hydration. Those are recovery activities. But so is taking naps and sleep, resting, relaxing. Those are recovery activities as well. And so we want to make sure that we're scheduling all of those things during the week so that when we practice or when we compete, we feel like we've got the maximal amount of energy that we really want. So we can stay focused, we can stay in control of our emotions, and we can also manage our determination and motivation, the will to compete, the will to win. That's directly tied to your energy level, right? Fatigue definitely hits at your will to win. So I think that's where I would start, Josh. So what are your thoughts on kind of those fundamentals and some other things you'd work on the week ahead?
Yeah, I really liked a lot of that. I like that you bring up scheduling a lot of this stuff out. So whether it's scheduling out what does that week of practice look like? So does that include some match play? Does that include some fine tuning on certain aspects of your game? Probably not the time to try to radically change a stroke or to try to make huge technical differences before a match most of the time. But scheduling, okay, what does that week of practice look like? What is that, maybe what time you're aiming to get to bed and wake up? Maybe even scheduling out some of those meals, just so that we're leaving less things up to chance. We're not trying to, get home and make that decision about what we're eating for dinner the night before the match. We're thinking that through ahead of time and maybe, planning ahead so that we don't just do something based on convenience. So I think the more that these sorts of things can be scheduled and planned out ahead of time, the better. Um, and yeah, I also like the point about not expending too much energy, but trying to um, not overwork ourselves right before the match. A lot of players are into the strength and conditioning piece in terms of strengthening or in terms of working on their speed, let's say. But we want to make sure that those most intense workouts aren't taking place too close to the match, or there might be some muscle fatigue or some tiredness. So yeah, no, I really liked all of that. Yeah, I think one piece I would add in is to try to we as sports psychology professionals can help players really think about these scenarios that they might get into in a match. So thinking about, okay, based on maybe some past performances, what are some items that we might be working on? Maybe it's the control of their emotions. So okay, what are some types of situations that you're likely to encounter in this match? Maybe in the past it's been a break point or a deuce point where it didn't go your way, and that led to more negative emotions or anger. Maybe it's performance anxiety and feeling tight on a big point, and we're working through, okay, how can you handle these situations as they arise so that during that big point you can feel a little bit looser, so you can feel more in control of that situation. That could involve visualization and actually trying to visualize these specific situations. It could involve sort of writing down a planned response for certain types of situations you might encounter, but trying to think about situations that may come up or could come up in the match, and then also thinking about the strategy piece. Is this somebody that you've played before? Is this somebody that maybe you've heard about or one of your friends or teammates has played before? So those are a couple pieces that I would add in. Thinking about some situations that are likely to occur, the strategy piece, and then also scheduling and preparing. All these different areas like your practices, like your nutrition, even your hydration, your sleep, and so that we don't have to leave too much up to chance.
And I think, the things you were talking about are great additions to whatever your practice plan is on the court that week, right? I mean, yeah, some of it could be off the court as well. But yeah, by bringing more purpose to those practices, working through different situations that you may know you're going to encounter, or different strategies or game plans, um, if it's no ad, hey, we got to work on our deuce point play this week. Those types of things, and I think that's all that is really important. And there might be some, depending on your habits, there may be some mental um, skills fundamentals that you would pay attention to during the week. So if you do meditation regularly, if you do visualization regularly, you want to continue doing those things. So now let's say the match is on Saturday, Josh, and it's Friday, or you're going to help somebody plan for Friday. What are some ideas that you would have them go through for that day before, night before the tournament or the match?
Yeah, I think some of the items we touched on already. Thinking about, okay, what is that meal before the match look? The meal the night before look like? Okay, what time do we want to be going to bed? Are there certain tools like meditation? Perhaps you've been meditating 3 or 4 times a week for 10 minutes, let's say, and the night before the match might be a great time to implement that again. Maybe it's visualization, visualizing certain situations that could occur, visualizing how you want to be feeling out there. We have a whole episode that we dedicated to this topic, so we don't have to get too much into that. But the night before can be a time to dive into certain things like your strategy, to really play out some of these things that could occur. But I will say that is, there, there's an expression, different strokes for different folks. And, I'm definitely a believer that different things work for each person, where for certain types of tennis players, the more that you do and the more prepared and the more time you're spending the night before, the more confident you're going to feel when you're out there, because you'll feel like, okay, I've checked all the boxes, all the I's have been dotted, the T's have been crossed, I'm ready to go. Where for somebody else, that might actually make them a little bit more nervous. For them, it might be, okay, I want to feel loose when I'm out there, I want to feel comfortable, and spending too much time the night before for that particular person could cause them to overthink the situation. And maybe then they're overthinking it. Maybe they don't get a great night's sleep, and then things can start to take a turn from the worse for there. So I think it does depend on the person a little bit. I think some of it is trial and error and figuring out what works best for that particular person. But broadly, for most people, I would say, trying to be intentional about how you spend that night in terms of those key pieces, like what time you're going to bed, like what you're going to be eating, and like what, if there are mental skills that you're going to be utilizing that night, um, when you're going to be doing them, where that's going to take place. Even things like, okay, is the door going to be, making sure that the door is closed, trying to limit distractions when that actually takes place, so that it can be, so that it can be done at a higher quality, without any limiting factors. Trying to be as intentional about planning out that night before and then the next morning, leading up to the match or leading up to the tournament.
Yeah, I think those are all great ideas, and um, I guess another thing that I would add in, and maybe to be more specific on this, is um, have players really think about their goals for the next day, like their process goals. Um, I prefer that they write them down, but that doesn't have to be it, especially if we can kind of commit them to memory and so forth. But I like to have them written down so that they can be referred to during the match, if possible, right? Whether that's on an index card or some sort of player journal. So I think even if that's a conversation between, the sports psych or the coach and the player, or the player just on his or her own, I think it's good to formulate that. I think another aspect of the evening, and again, like you said, different players are going to have different approaches, but I like that people go to bed in a good mood. So whether that's you're thinking about tennis and you're excited about it, or if you just want to chill out and relax and watch a movie, or just hang out with your family and friends, or something. Or I had one athlete; she loved reading books, so she would read the night before. Right? So everybody's got something there, but I think if we could, in general, try to generate, feeling in a good and relaxed mood, and so that we wake up, in hopefully a similar state. I think we should also talk about the day too, Josh, right? Because I was speaking with a junior player today. He's very good. He's, I'll just say top 50 in the world junior player. So I asked him, what are the things that you do to get ready? Because he's played, some of the junior Grand Slams. And so he had a really interesting approach to it. He didn't have much on the mental side, but what he said is he actually practices twice a day. Now, of course, this is a high elite level player, right? Now, we're not all going to be able to do this, but he practices twice that day. But both practices are about just getting feel and confidence, and he's just trying to maybe also get used to the facility, get used to the balls that this tournament is using, right? So a lot of that type of stuff, right? Comfort level and confidence were a part of those. Um, but he also mentioned something I thought that was really interesting that all of us should think about is he called them mobility sessions. So before his first practice, he would have like a mobility session, which was, partner stretching, foam rolling, doing some speed and agility work. And then he'd have a longer one after his second practice. And normally his second practice would end by 2 or 3 p.m. And then he'd have this mobility session. Again, just so that he's feeling good the rest of the day and he's feeling good going into the evening. And so I thought, hey, there's some good tips there. We may not all be able to practice twice or want to even do that. But the purpose of being on the court, building confidence, building rhythm, getting used to different things, and then taking a good amount of time to stretch, foam roll, recover. If you could do a partner stretch with somebody, that's great. It's a great way to get loosened up. So I thought that was a really good approach to the day. We also talked about, when do you pack your bag? I'm usually an advocate for packing it as much as you can the day before so that we're not running around that morning wondering where something is, whether we've taken care of that. And maybe there's a checklist of things that need to go into the bag. And again, so that you're not having to search for these things on the morning or the day of the tournament. Want to take care of as much of that as possible. I also think, we've talked about sort of the emotional piece, the mental piece, but not everybody needs this, Josh. But maybe we want to get a little pumped up too. Maybe we want to watch some tennis, or do something that gets us in the mood to compete. So that's, I think, another consideration is that kind of thing. Now, this is going to sound like really weird. I'm dating myself here, but like when I was 11, I used to play the soundtracks for Rocky and Rocky 2 on my turntable. So that's how long ago that was. But that's the kind of thing that would get me pumped up to play. And I'd even do that the day before. Just to get that kind of music playing in my mind. That kind. So we should be thinking about those types of things as we, go into that evening, hopefully getting in a good mood before we go to sleep, and then we wake up the next day, hopefully feeling good.
Yeah, yeah. Even if people aren't listening on turntables currently, I think listening to some sort of playlist, even a Rocky playlist. I mean, there's a
Sure.
lot of great inspirational pump up music there, or maybe it's some sort of playlist that you've created that helps you get into that type of mindset that you want to be in. Leading up to a match, and maybe you have it, and certain times you feel like, okay, I'm feeling a little flat right now. I really need this, or it's some and you use it sporadically as needed, or it's something that you build into your routine and you use every time. Another thing that can be helpful is pulling out your phone and going on YouTube, pulling up some highlights of maybe a favorite player,
Mm-hmm.
a player that is you aspire to play like, a player where maybe there's you admire their intensity. Maybe it's Serena Williams or Nadal or Djokovic or Federer, whoever it is. And you watching them, even if just for a 5-minute video, can really help get you pumped up and ready to go for that match. Yeah, I think again, the more that you can plan out that time from when you wake up until the match actually starts, the better. I really like the idea of getting out there and hitting, before a match. I think, unfortunately, most players don't have the ability to get out and hit twice, but, getting out and hitting some balls, you can, work out some of the kinks. You can get used to the court, ideally, or the balls. I've even seen situations where maybe court time is limited, and there's only a certain number of courts, but maybe you're able to, hit on a a park nearby and at least get to hit a few balls, or even just hitting in the parking lot, going, doing some volleys back and forth with somebody else. But, just being able to at least hit a little bit, you can help to find that rhythm, maybe work out some of the kinks ahead of time. And yeah, as you were mentioning before, in terms of a suggestion the night before, in terms of wanting to go to bed in a good mood and you wanting to feel loose, and maybe that means you're hanging out with your friends and family. Maybe that means you're watching a movie. I think the same for many people applies for before a match, where yes, we want to be focused, we want to be feeling, you know, like we have our head on the game and we're not all over the place. But for some people, I know a player who, about an hour before the match, before she was about to go out, would actually chat with, would call up one of her friends, and would, a couple minutes in, they'd be laughing, and the last thing in that moment that she's thinking about is the match, but it's helping her to stay loose. She's not overthinking it. She's not thinking about every possible scenario of what could go well and what could go wrong. Um, and then, after that conversation ends, she's probably feeling better about things, and then can really start that pre-match routine that she's worked on. So I think it does depend on the person, but I think in terms of best practices, whether it's the night before or that day, getting yourself to that point of comfort, and going to bed in a good mood and waking up and feeling comfortable. And for that's on the player, or maybe on the player and their coach or their sports psychology professional, to figure out what works best for that individual, because it's certainly not a one size fits all type of thing. But tinkering around with it, where okay, you have a match, you have a tournament, and you try something, you implement a routine, and maybe you write that down. Ideally, you write that down, what that's going to look like, and you try to execute it. And then afterwards, you look back at it and you say, okay, how did that go? Okay, I felt pretty loose going up to that match. I felt locked in. Okay, then there's probably some good stuff there. Or that didn't work so well. Okay, let's make some adjustments. Were there aspects of that routine that I liked, that I think can be helpful? Okay, let's keep that. Okay, maybe there are other aspects of it we want to tinker with. But going through that trial and error process and figuring out what works best for you in terms of helping you get in that right mindset. Where maybe for some athletes, they want to be actually visualizing certain patterns of play. Serve plus one, return plus one, that they want to be going to in that match. Maybe if they're playing against somebody they've played before, they know that a certain type of pattern is going to be most helpful for helping them win points time and time again. Where, for that player, visualizing those types of points, those types of patterns and situations right before a match could be really helpful. Or for another player, it's jumping rope and doing some, footwork exercises, or just, closing your eyes and breathing for a few minutes, and really trying to be present and be calm, and not be too antsy, and feeling that performance anxiety. So long answer to a short question, but I think it does depend on the person, and I really think it is trial and error, and going through that process of each match, and journaling, and figuring out, okay, what went really well, what didn't go so well, and let's adjust from there.
Yeah. I think one thing I forgot to mention that probably should be worked on during the week, but is critical on match day, is that overarching mindset or perspective. Many of us, may be worried about this tournament, may feel pressure or expectations or so forth. And, we've discussed a bunch of different perspectives to try to incorporate into your mindset to help lessen the pressure, whether that's everything is practice or keep expectations low and standards high. You want to be working on those perspectives almost as like your self-talk plan for the week, right? How you're going to talk to yourself about this event. And can you make it more of an opportunity? Can you make it more of a challenge rather than thinking about what you have to lose or it being somehow a threat to something, whether that's your identity as a good tennis player or to your UTR or ranking or whatever it is. And I think it's really important that you're talking to yourself during the week about the match in such a way that you feel like you can compete at your best. Now, some people play great when pressure's on, and that's fine. Others need to talk to themselves in a way that reduces pressure. I think every tennis player, as they become a great competitor, needs to learn to become a great storyteller when it comes to themselves and tell a story that allows them to compete, focus, control themselves, their composure, the best that they can. And so I think that's a big part of it because that'll factor in on match day that you're talking about that self-talk plan. When it comes to the day, certainly hitting that day is obviously recommended. Now, Josh, you and I, we live in New England, and certainly during the winter, if people are playing matches and tournaments, it's close to impossible, depending on the event. Some events will allow for practice courts, but can be very difficult. And if you're an adult playing league tennis, it's impossible, really, to get practice courts. So we recognize that. But that still is something you'd want to strive to do. Maybe you can get a court somewhere else, or like you said, go to a park. I would say even last case resort, maybe it's better than perhaps the volley to volley in a parking lot, but is a backboard or a wall. I've done that before tournaments, and that you can hit out pretty well on that. When I'm looking at preparing for a tournament or helping a player prepare for a tournament, aside from the physical energy stuff of timing your eating, which probably should be trying to have a full meal 2.5 to 3 hours beforehand. Again, we're all a little bit different, but that's a decent practice for that. But also making sure you've packed your bag with snacks and whatever that you need, energy gels, the right drinks, etc. I like to think about, again, that day warming up a few different areas of our performance. We want to warm up our focus. We want to warm up our confidence. And we want to warm up, again, our positive emotions. So from a focus perspective, we could be reviewing goals. We could be, you mentioned earlier, we could be writing how we would write down our response to certain difficult situations. Hey, let's read that over again on match day. Let's visualize that, me going through that. I think that's a great tool to be using on match day because it is a mental rehearsal, but it can also, if we're feeling at all hesitant about doing something, it helps you get through the hesitancy because you are practicing it in your mind. You're repeating that in your mind. So those can be some good things with focus. When it comes to confidence, maybe we talked about this with Steve Walker. Look at your confidence journal if that's something that you do. Remind yourself of all the great work you've done this particular week. You're ready. Remind yourself that you're ready. Remind yourself that you've perhaps competed in something like this before. So you can do it. It's not a big deal. This is something normal for you. You may want to review either through visualization or something that you've written down what your strengths are. That's always a great thing to think about is the best parts of your game and using that part of your game. And then with the emotional piece, let's think about what are the productive emotions I want to use today. And sometimes I focus a lot on the positive stuff, like let's use gratitude as a powerful positive emotion that can just get us in a good mood. You mentioned the talking to a friend. In fact, that player I was talking to today, that's part of his, like, something he does in the 1 hour before the start of the match is he calls his best friend. And they just talk, and like you said, for 5 minutes, and they're laughing and they're in a good mood. So whatever that is for you, you want to make sure you're doing that. To get yourself in a good mood. I like the idea of intentionally expressing gratitude over the course of that day, whether it's just thanking maybe the captain of your team or a tournament organizer, just thanking them for doing their job. We wouldn't be able to do this without those people. And those people will appreciate the message, but you'll also get a really great boost just from expressing that kind of gratitude. Um, and you already talked about this piece, Josh, so I won't go too deep into it. But the idea of pumping yourself up, music, videos, awesome. I think the other piece of videos, not only does it inspire you, but let's say, yeah, you're watching somebody who you kind of modeled your game after. Again, you're programming your mind to play like that person. So, maybe you're a person who hits a one-handed backhand. So watch some Federer, watch some Stan Wawrinka. Like, just visualize that and ingrain that image of them ripping one-handed backhand so that, like, when the ball comes to you and you see it coming to your backhand, you're excited to hit that shot, and you've already grooved your mind with an image that you know is going to help you through that. So I think those are some things that I like to throw out to a player and say, all right, I would like you to give me some ideas on how we warm these things up. And just like you said, as we're developing this pre-match routine or preparation routine, let's see what works, see what doesn't, and we tweak. So that after several weeks of doing this, you get to something that you feel really comfortable and it gets you to the place that you want to be.
Yeah, yeah, I love the way that you broke that down into those three categories. I think a couple things that came to mind were as it relates to preparation, and you mentioned packing your bag. A book that we've talked about it a lot on this podcast at different points, and it's certainly one of my favorite books. Is Winning Ugly, and in that book, he actually devotes an entire chapter of the book to packing your bag, which can be a very overlooked aspect of preparation, but I know he tells a story in the book about having I forget the dollar amount, but I think it was his left shoe that's like a $100,000 left shoe that based on his tournament winnings, based on having that extra shoe available, or but it's often the type of thing with packing your bag where you don't know how important it is until you don't have it, until you forget to pack that extra bar or that extra energy gel, or you don't, maybe you have your water bottle, but you feel like you need a little extra and you don't have a Gatorade or Powerade or whatever it may be. So I think slowing down, and it's definitely the night before, trying to think about these all how you do want to pack your bag, in terms of different foods that you might have, food or drinks, in terms of having a towel, maybe it's an extra pair of socks or an extra shirt, something like that. Brad Gilbert also talks about how just the very act of changing into a new clothing item can actually be sort of a mental reset. Maybe you just lost a set and we've talked about the red light routine of leaving the court during that moment, but maybe you change shirts or you change an article of clothing, and that's a signal that you're sending to yourself that, okay, we're resetting. We're starting anew here, starting fresh. So that can certainly be helpful. The other thing I'll bring up, and this is something, Brian, you've talked about a lot in past episodes, and I know this is something you do with a lot of your players in terms of bringing an index card to the court, and bringing something that has different reminders to yourself. And this is going to look different for each person. Maybe for some players that is more different things about your mindset, in terms of viewing everything as practice, or in terms of you wanting to be a warrior out on the court, or not letting anything get to you. Maybe it's something to do with your strategy, or in terms of how you want to be playing, or maybe it's certain self-talk phrases, or ways that you can help yourself reset during certain moments. But no, that's something that I think can definitely be helpful for a lot of people. Bringing something to the court where you can look back at it. Maybe it's before the match, or maybe it's during a changeover in between sets, and you have that. It's very easy in the heat of the moment of a match or before a match where maybe tensions are high and your heart is beating, to forget some of these things you've been working on in the practice court or off court. So having something tangible that you can use as a reminder can be really helpful.
And that's a great part of the pre-match or preparation routine is creating that. And my sort of rule of thumb on that is this is an opportunity for you to distill all the wisdom of all of your coaches into something that, and so that if you were in trouble, what would you want them to say to you to help get you out of it? And so that's what you can put there. It doesn't, like you said, these could be different things for different people, Josh. Like, so maybe somebody wants some technical reminders. That's fine. I'm not going to say that that's wrong. That might be what you want to be reminded of. But I have found, just from my own personal use, some of the more mental type of reminders, the more competitive type of reminders, have been the most helpful. Because you think about the story we were telling regarding Novak Djokovic and what he did at the French Open when he left the court. It wasn't about technique. It was about him getting himself motivated to go back out there, and he had to shift his voice to something more encouraging. So we're not all Novak Djokovic, surprisingly, right? So, can we somehow come up with something that would, if we got into a situation like he was, where the negative voice was winning, what would you need to hear to get you back on track? So I do think it's a great tool to use on the court. I would say to get it to work, you need a changeover routine. And you almost need a routine like when you enter the court, that if it's an index card or a journal, because if it's still in the bag by the time you start warming up, it probably stays in the bag. In my experience, it needs to come out right away so that you can see it and it's there, and then to look at it. So there should be some sort of routine of regularly checking this type of thing. And maybe it's just looking at your process goals if things are going good, right? Maybe there's a green light changeover routine, and perhaps there's a yellow light changeover routine where we look at some different things to help get us back on track. But that can be a really nice, thoughtful thing to do as part of your preparation. You may find that you only need to do it once, maybe for a few months, and it's like always going to be the same reminders. I know for me, when I did this, I could get a reminder sheet that would probably work for me for like 6 months, and I wouldn't have to really change much about it. But there might be other times where you would change it, or you want to make it very specific to a player, whatever. But that is a good feature of the preparation routine, and it just gets you to think things through a little bit more, and from all perspectives, right? Not just the game plan, but about different things that could go wrong or have gone wrong in the past. And if I could have my coach come out, what would I want my coach to say to me?
Yeah. I like that you mentioned making sure that you bring out that card as you're getting onto the court. It's easy to forget about it. And another thing, I like also that you're having the mindset of, okay, if you were to have a coach out with you on court, what would they help you say? Where oftentimes, as we know, tennis can be a lonely sport where it's just you out there. Yes, maybe you're certain situations where you have a coach with you, but most of the time your coach is not active. So having just those reminders that you can look back at can make a huge difference. And the other thing I would say, and we often talk about how we want to be learning from our past experiences. And maybe there's a match where we go down a set, and then we don't feel, as we look back, we lose the match in 2 sets, and we look back at it and we feel like, hey, maybe I didn't give my best fight that second set. How can we truly learn from that experience Maybe we journal about it. Maybe we think back, and then maybe based on that experience, then we change what goes in that index card. And then we have that reminder, like what you're talking about with Novak Djokovic, where, okay, if I'm down a set, what is something I can tell myself in that moment to help me get over that, that setback of losing that first set. Maybe it's, it's sort of quieting that self-doubt that I may be feeling in that moment. Maybe it's just a reminder to myself of who I want to be, that person I'm striving to become in terms of my identity, or whatever it may be. But having certain reminders to yourself in terms of your mindset based on those past experiences and learning from those past experiences can help to shape what you want to remind yourself of and what you want to have on that index card. And no, I think that's something tangible that a lot of players can utilize and bring to the court with them the next time that they go out in a tournament, where it's it doesn't all have to be perfect, but this is something that by just starting that process and even the process of, as you said, of building that into your preparation routine, and actually sitting down and writing those things down can actually do a lot to help to distill your thoughts and help you to become more clear about what you want to be doing when you're out there. So I think that can be helpful for a lot of players.
Yeah, and as we begin to wrap this up, I think one thing I would recommend that you mentioned, Josh, for this whole preparation routine is try to schedule this as much as possible as you go along, not only during the week, but try to structure that day and have a schedule or a checklist of things that you go through. So again, that you're not forgetting something, but you're doing it in a structured way. And you'll feel more prepared, I think, when you schedule it out, like you said. Um, and feeling prepared is a big part of feeling confident going into the match. And so I'd really like to see the listeners try this. Try to schedule it out. Try to be like that professional. Try to take it to that level and see what happens. And then, like you said, Josh, then you tweak it and you go from there and you constantly improve it. You think of a guy like, different sport, obviously, but like Tom Brady, in his 40s. Is his pregame preparation the same as it was when he was 22? Probably not. I'm sure he's evolved it and improved it. And at this point in his career, probably more or less perfected it based on who he is and his body type and what he needs and etc. We should all be striving to reach that level of professionalism with our preparation, especially if tennis is important to us. Otherwise, we're allowing a lot of variables to come in that really can make our performances inconsistent from match to match to match. So that's one of my selling points on the whole preparation routine is if you want to have more consistent performances, bring more consistency to how you prepare and that pre-match routine. So that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's show, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for Josh and me, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, which includes YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check out our Instagram account. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon in our next episode.